Um, and we'll just kind of go through it. And I have read these, but I actually read these last chapters while I was in Kenya, so it's also been a little bit for me. But I did finish them. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to backtrack through to water searches. Our last call last month, we were supposed to do both buried and water searches, and we had so much great discussion that we didn't get through much of water, which was awesome. Great problem to have. It's been cool to have kind of like, the variety of people who can show up on these calls is really lovely. I can't remember who it was that was on, but she's done a bunch of search and rescue work. So it was cool to get to kind of ping around with her on buried stuff, because she'd done so much more than, like, generally speaking in conservation. We don't have a lot of buried sources. I mean, bumblebees, I guess, like bee nests.
Oh, I'm going to have one for the orchids. What are you gonna have? So I want to search for underground orchids. Which is interesting.
Do you want to backtrack a little bit then and kind of go through some of the buried stuff and chat about it?
Yeah, so that would be great.
Maybe more relevant. Okay, yeah. So we'll do a little bit of a speed through. Also, I don't think, like, the tracking trailing chapter, which is that last chapter, again, for most people in the conservation world, it's kind of more like, oh, interesting odor stuff. Cool that dogs can do this, but unless you're in kind of like the anti-poaching units, I don't think many of us are doing much with it. I was sorry, we're all over the place, but I was in conversation when I was talking to Action for Cheetahs. One of their goals with their scat dog program, or their potential goals, is to kind of expand that out and spin it out into their own program, so it's not just under the Cheetahs program. And then, one of the things that they had talked about potentially being an option for those dogs is, apparently it is a little bit of a problem, or like they would want to be able to track down an elephant that had been caught in a snare, so that they could anesthetize it and then give it veterinary care before the snare got super infected, because obviously a snare generally isn't going to kill an elephant. So that was like one of the only conservation tracking applications I've really heard of, where I was like, oh yeah, that would totally actually be like, it would be kind of a blood trailing situation.
Yeah, totally.
Really specific conservation purpose.
There's another project over here in the UK where they're utilizing tracking dogs, and it's an eradication project for stoats. And then the grant works up on Orkney, and they want to use tracking dogs to track, like, from a last known sighting, when they're down to like the mop-up phase, the last few individuals, track them to the dens, so they know where the dens are. So yeah,
that makes sense. And I wonder if James Davis, I don't think he's ever mentioned doing it with the red fox work, but it seems like that would be another potential application.
I was going to say, I think we do it for fox, for getting foxes here. Yeah,
that would make sense. And I know Working Dogs for Conservation, one of their dogs that's in Africa can track individual rhinos, and I'm not quite sure why or when they utilize that, but they do have a dog who will track individual rhinos.
Oh, I want to say I read about that, but I can also not remember what the reason was. But I do know that for individual rhinos, they they kind of give them heaps of vet care and stuff like that. So would it surprise me if it's related?
It was interesting actually getting to be on the ground in Africa. I mean, obviously, like, that's a huge continent, and I've only been to Kenya now, but kind of realizing like how easy it actually would be to lose an elephant or whatever in some of these reserves, because it seems like they're such big animals that, like, of course you would, like, roughly know where they are. And you kind of do. Like, it was really interesting, kind of, and there were elephants moving through nearish camp, like the rumor mill would start and the radio chatter would pick up, and they'd kind of they'd be like, yeah, we had 2 bulls move through the other day. So like they may be scouts, keep an eye out for the rest of the herd. And like there's all sorts of chatter when they're coming through, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know exactly where they are. And that's probably even less so for anything that's not as big and dangerous as an elephant. Because with the elephants where we were in Kenya, it was a safety concern. Just a couple days after I left, there was a woman who was gored by an elephant. So it's everyone's very aware of where they are, not because of conservation, but because they will maim you. Terrifying, just horrifying creatures. I mean, like so cool, but also terrifying. Okay, so soil. Let's see. I'm just going to kind of skim through what I have underlined. And one of the first thing that I had written down that was really interesting, and this, Megan, is going to be, I would love to hear more about what you know about the biology of the specific orchids that you're looking at. Because the first thing I have written down is that in dry soil, volatile organic compounds are kind of absorbed onto the particles as a residue and are not necessarily free to move. And I think we talked about this earlier in book club, kind of noticing how the author talks about how there's some speculation that when the dogs exhale and that moisture kind of hits, that helps revolatilize odor that's in dust. And the same thing can happen with really dry soils. I assume orchids I know nothing about underground orchids. Are they in relatively humid soil?
Well, I don't know. They are in the wheat belt, like, so they're in these sort of lower lying areas. So they have more moisture than the surrounding soil. But that's also why there are very few of them and there's very few areas left, because those were preferentially cleared for growing wheat. That also tend to be flatter and opener because there's sort of like there's like a small melaleuca that grows there, and it's easier to clear that than the surrounding woodland. So there's that. But so I think there's some moisture in the soil, but it's also quite dry. It's like just on the other side of the 300 mil isobar, so it's not a particularly high rainfall area.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that'll be interesting there. And then yeah, so then the other thing that I found interesting, and this is all just on page 1 of chapter 5, is the Osterkamp writes, information on the movement of scent in soils is available from studies of buried explosives and decomposition VOCs, but there does not seem to be any information for drugs and other buried sources. So there's quite a bit of literature on the movement of gases, water, fertilizers, pesticides, and other chemicals in agricultural soils.
Yeah, that's
we can kind of use to develop insight, but there just hasn't been as much research. It's like almost the whole chapter is about dead bodies and bombs.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And I would imagine that the bombs may be a little bit more analogous, like if we're looking at like these 2 extremes, just because I've got to imagine a decomposing body, especially early on, that's just such a large
scent
body of odor. Yeah. But like I'm totally talking out of my butt there. Do these orchids have like above ground air roots or like anything that comes up above ground? Like, do they photosynthesize?
No, they have a tripod. Well, sort of. In July, they flower for 2 weeks, and when they flower, they send the fruiting body up, and it opens, and there's like a flower cluster inside. But it opens like at ground level, so like under the surface
or whatever
soil, under the surface soil still, and it does probably have a volatile that would go through that, and it would probably be more available than other stuff. But actually, if you shove your nose in it, I can smell it.
Hooray!
So it must be quite volatile and should be relatively accessible at that period. But it's only open for 2 weeks every year. But then that's probably a good time to find it because you can confirm it.
But, when I was thinking, because one of the other things he talks about in this book or in this chapter, and hi Jess, you can turn your camera on, leave it off, whatever. We're in a variety of time zones. We've got Megan it's 4 a.m. so she's not turning her camera on. So we decided we're going to go back through the buried source chapter as well, and then kind of speed through buried, water, and tracking. Because Megan is doing the underground orchid stuff. So I'm like pointing to her corner as if she's in the same corner for all of us. Because she's actually doing a buried source thing, and especially tracking and trailing is just, it's not generally as relevant for us. So we can skim. But Megan, one of the other things they talk about quite a bit in this chapter is cracks. And even cracks made during drought being like a good vehicle for moving odor around. So I wonder
interesting.
So I wonder if the odor, even like after flowering is done in the coming weeks, when you still have that little, like, I've got to imagine there's a little bit of like through the dirt.
Yeah, that's totally what happens. It pushes the fruiting body up from where it's hanging out.
So that probably, you could almost get some like capillary action of odor, I imagine.
So good. Yeah, I didn't think of that, but it makes perfect sense.
Hopefully. These are all. But other question, July, is that your dry season, wet season? Do you have dry and wet seasons where you are?
It's summer. Peak summer.
Okay, so not very rainy.
No, we get most of our rain in winter here because it's like a Mediterranean climate. But most of the orchids flower in autumn, which is like pre-winter and through the winter, so it's quite unusual actually. Sorry, I said summer, but it's winter. I don't know why I said that.
Okay, yeah. Well, I don't know why I also was just like, oh yeah, of course, the other side of the hemisphere has the same summer as us.
No, I don't know why I said that. I'm just 4 a.m. It's 4 a.m. So it's July.
I'm putting you on the spot so much at a rude hour.
Most of our rain is in winter, and so basically it's after the kind of bulk of the rain is, or like all the winter storms have come through. That's when they. So it would probably be the like wettest period
That's kind of potentially perfect, especially if it's after the wettest part. So, because one of the things they talk about some in this book is that actually at that moment, as humidity is rising or water is evaporating, also kind of helps in scent availability.
I was wondering about this. I kind of mentioned it a couple months ago when I was on a call with
Morgan.
I want to say Jen, but I'm sure Jen's the engineer. The lady that does the cadaver dogs, who's my 4am brain's name is eluding me right now. But yeah, I was kind of thinking about time of day and like, is it the best time of day is maybe like when the first bit of sun hits to kind of take advantage of that sort of process.
When I was thinking like you wouldn't necessarily want to, if you could avoid it, time things like in the midst of monsoon season either, because then like what we've kind of seen anecdotally is like torrential rain or constant rain can really actually like tamp down all the odor, but like in the moments after it's done raining, then everything's up and like that post-rain smell is really helpful. So okay, so then the next couple things that I had highlighted are not necessarily things that I'm going to read out loud because it's just kind of like the physical properties for interest of scent movement in soil is, and then like a list of factors. And then same for the chemical properties of scent availability that kind of talk about how different like size molecules can interact with the soil. It's the sort of stuff that's interesting, but like if you don't know anything about the molecule your dog is detecting, I'm not necessarily sure how applicable it is.
Yeah, right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then there are a couple interesting, so for buried stuff, this graphic I found really cool. So if we've got a source here, this kind of star,
yeah,
you're going to have odor up here, but then also kind of at the bottom of the slope, you'll have odor kind of pooling there.
yeah.
Which, you know, because it kind of like moved down with the water table.
Oh, interesting.
Is kind of the theory, at least. Yeah, it was really interesting. Then a couple good and then a couple very confusing graphics in this chapter about where odor may or may not move with like water tables and water tables and gravity. That's the word. So then moving on, I'm on page 122 if anyone's following.
I have a question.
They start talking. Go ahead.
About those, like, how long, like, would that be a long process or just like a few months? Or
they don't, I don't know if they know.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
A day, like, I mean, it wouldn't be a day, but you know what I mean. Interesting.
I'm trying to remember how much they talked about time. They did mention it some. I mean, you would think with plants you've got enough time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't, it would probably help if it wasn't as spread out. Like, because they're underground and they just have this one flower, kind of want to pinpoint them. But I suspect they have different odor at the.
Do you know anything about the soil type there? Like, does it tend to be kind of dense organic or clay soil, or is it kind of like
well, they grow wheat there, so I think it's pretty nice soil actually. But it's not dense organic, but it would have kind of a nice organic layer in the top, which is probably where the orchids are living.
Yeah,
it's kind of quite
one of the big things we talk
loose.
about a lot is like,
yeah, underneath there's like a kind of laterite, gravelly type layer underneath, but there's like a nice organic layer on top.
Okay, that will probably, based on this, help.
Yay!
Kind of avoid having too much odor coming out. Like, because they talk a lot about like the porosity of soil affecting how much odor is coming out, and if you're like buried in a gravel bar, there's so much more space in between all those rocks for the odor to come up. But then they also, like, it's all so confusing and so dependent. Like, this is set theory stuff is fascinating but also frustrating, because they're like, but then also if it rains, then you've got so much more space in between all the grains that then everything just right down from the, like, maybe porosity is kind of also gosh, I had the word and then I just lost it, like volatility. Like more dynamic system. Okay. Sorry, I'm eating grapes that have giant seeds in them. It's very frustrating. So then the big thing that they talk about as well is that potentially warm oil but cold air can be favorable. So that would almost point toward evening. I mean, it would be really interesting to run, like, do you want to try right as the sun is hitting in the morning, or do you want to try in the evening as the air is cooling and the soil is warming?
And like, okay, that makes sense, because it's like it's warmer and it's coming out, but it's kind of sticking down low.
You're getting like that temperature gradient again will like pull those cold molecules up towards the warm molecules.
Yeah.
So that was one thing they talked about on page 122. And then later on in 122, they say that laboratory experiments have shown that in dry soils and release of VOs previously from 1996. This indicates time for sources in soil are late night, early morning. Air humidity is high, is present, or after a light rain. It doesn't say anything about what wet soil, when wet soil is better, at least right there.
Okay, cool.
Then I just had one thing underlined on the next page that was just a little funny because it was like, oh, in case anyone needs to do a murder, it says searches for bodies in landfills is an almost hopeless task unless the cat is disrupted, removed, and is accessible to the dogs are allowed to access underlying material. This type of search is extremely
okay. Cool. Body in landfill.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a true crime junkie, and I can't remember, but there have been a couple pretty nasty serial killers or whatever, like use away with stuff. So I'm always like, careful what you write in here.
Yeah, you're like, don't put it in there.
Yeah, don't give too many instruct the professionals without helping other people figure out how to get around the professionals.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there is there's some good info here about ground cover mitigating the effect of atmospheric conditions. So if you've got more ground cover that kind of insulates and reduces the solar radiation around, and that ground cover can also kind of absorb and hold moisture, which potentially will make things wetter at the ground than they would be a little bit higher up.
Oh yeah. So like we made some smoke videos, and like the smoke goes into the plants when they're wet. It just like sucks into them. It's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. And then that was actually, that ties into the next thing I had underlined, which was that the detection success increases for mines when there's more and more vegetative cover near the mine.
Intriguing. For like, as in, and what if they put in the mines bombs or something?
Yeah, they like landmines.
Oh, landmines. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Because I'm also gonna look for bats in caves, and I was like, what are they looking for in mines? Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and they're again, so much of this is speculative, but they kind of think that those VOCs might contact the roots and then kind of get pulled up. So I wonder if even you may end up in a situation where, this orchid isn't breaking the surface, but all the plants right around it are kind of absorbing some amount of its odor and bringing it up.
Well, that is very interesting because it has a tripartite mutualism. So it lives in the roots. Am I gone? Hello?
Oh, hello. I can still hear you.
Oh, okay. For some reason, it went into safe driving mode.
Oh,
I'm definitely not driving. Yeah, so it's really cool because it lives in the roots of this one plant, the like little Melaleuca. And then that also has a relationship with the fungus, and the fungus is kind of in the surface, the soil surface, and then the Melaleuca is obviously above ground, so it could spread through all of those things potentially.
Right. Am I back?
You are back.
Yes, you're back.
Okay.
Sorry, Megan, that was really interesting. I was just wondering, what are you using as a training sample? Sorry, this is going way off topic now.
No, go for it.
Like, because obviously there's so much going on there.
It's experimental. So actually, probably I'm going to train my dog on something really easy, like poop for a different species for us to teach it how to search. And then because this is a kind of, we think it might be extinct. There's like,
oh wow,
we found 2 plants 2 years ago, but it has a congeneric, which is extremely close evolutionarily and lives not very far away. Annoyingly flowers 2 weeks later instead of 2 weeks earlier, which would be much more convenient for my field season. So I have this kind of mental idea that I'm going to train my dog to find that one, and use samples of the flower, basically. So get a permit to take the flower, train them on the flower, then train them in the field during the flowering season on known, like identified by botanists ones. And you can confirm that because you can kind of dig, if the flower's up, you can confirm because you can kind of like push the soil surface away and you can see that the flower, like I said, it was kind of accessible. But you guys can tell me if you think this is a completely bonkers training plan. And then the idea is to then go and find some in situ, or try to find one. There's like, we're hoping that one is still there because they live for a really long time, like 20 years. So we're hoping at least that one is still there and we can find one and train at least on that, having also trained on the congeneric and like reward really heavily. And then see if they can find others. So there's another species that's a congeneric on the East Coast, and they've successfully found those training on the flower. They did they so that I know that strategy would potentially work for as like a general principle, but the whole whether it translates, there's some science, I guess, suggesting that they can generalize a little bit, and that like we've got dogs that were like finding greater gliders that once they then rewarded on the other subspecies, they started to find it only, but like out of a certain number of dogs, only 1 or 2 kind of sort of
that's what
had a big change of behavior initially, even if they didn't indicate. But then once they had kind of found a sample and rewarded on it, then they started doing a good job at finding that subspecies. So I'm just kind of hoping that works. Anyway, it's like the only training plan I can think of. But if anyone comes up with a better idea, I'm totally open to it. So anyone I can think of that work, because there's no way I'm getting a permit to take that species that we only have 1 known individual of. Like probably there's more, but we can't, like, we're definitely not getting permit to take.
I know that plan makes sense. And I know there was that stonefly paper.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Where the dogs were able to generalize, and it seems like the sort of thing where like, I think you're right. Like some dogs are going to generalize more quickly and more readily, and other dogs won't. But if you can kind of set up your training in a way to like point the dog towards being a little bit more liberal, and a little bit more of a gambler. This might be the sort of situation where you do want a gambler, a dog who's going to be able to be like, hey, how about this?
What about this one? It'll be totally good.
Exactly. Which like, I mean, we've talked about this so much, at least on the podcast, where it's like with scat, that can be super annoying. But in this situation, like it's kind of nice. So that was
interesting. Oh, I was gonna say, so it's like potentially a terrible idea, but to be like, okay, I'm gonna find underground orchids, it's gonna be great. But it would be really,
I think you're coming into it with like the best plan possible given what the reality on the ground is.
Okay.
It may be an application where it would be worth trying to use some get scent tubes.
So is that I know that they exist, but I'm waiting for your podcast to come out so I can learn about them. But Caitlin,
Yeah, it was a funny podcast because it was definitely, I am not yet a skilled enough interviewer to do a good job of like asking hard questions when people are clearly very good at marketing speak.
Oh no. Okay. Yeah.
So no, I think it was still good. He's very much so a chemist and like talked a lot about kind of the chemical side of things.
Okay, cool.
But there were definitely parts of it where I wish that I had kind of been able to push a little bit harder on being like, okay, yeah, but like this is the first try, it can't be perfect. Like, what are the limitations that you're seeing that you're excited about improving on for the next round? You know, because like they're talking about
I see you've been practicing those questions in your head since the interview.
Lying awake thinking about it. So yeah, I mean, I personally have had really good luck with the get sent tubes overall, but yeah, they're just these little tubes, and the way he kind of explained them on the show is like, I've been kind of thinking them as like a sponge that like will pick up the odor and then it'll be saturated, but then like if you used it a little bit and squeezed it out and then put in a different environment, it would like pick up that next odor. And he did a pretty good job of explaining how that isn't quite right, but it sounds like the sort of application where it might be worth at least trying them. I know it seems like in particular frog folks have not had good luck with them. Like I've heard a couple people, like the people I've heard who have been least happy with scent tubes have almost all been amphibian people. So I'm thinking there may be something going on there.
I think
that's very interesting.
We've tried to use them with amphibians as well. And the problem we've had is just the amount of time, the welfare implications of keeping a live animal with the tube for the time that you need, because like 24 hours is the ideal time, but you can't do that with a live animal.
Right.
Yeah,
that's and that was the other thing he said is that it needs to be. Yeah, and I accidentally kind of ended up having a gotcha question for him that I don't think he was super happy about, where I was like researching a science highlight for the episode. And the most recent, I just like went onto Google Scholar and typed in get sent. And the most recent science highlight that I found was from a master's thesis that found that they didn't work, again, for amphibians. And I was kind of like, hey, I didn't do this as a science highlight, but I'd love to talk to you a little bit about this paper. And what he said was probably partially the issue there was that they may have been 24 hours, but they had like a big terrarium set up. So the tube wasn't, you know, it's like you would need to have the frog in this container for 24 hours with the get sent tube, which, yeah, you're right. Like that's a big welfare concern.
No, but it sounds perfect for my one flower.
Exactly. Well, you could even like take it and prop it right next to, you know, I don't know how delicate you have to be with these known sites, but like if you've got your buried source, can you put the tube and like maybe even dig a little bit of a depression so that it picks up that odor out in the wild? I don't know.
Could definitely put it on the surface. I'd be concerned about putting it in because they're quite a delicate fruiting body, and it's like they can have more than one.
Yeah, so
and they're growing up like right in that kind of area. But I could totally just like put it on the surface so at least the odor was available at the same location.
Yeah, it might be worth.
I mean, it's a bit weird and not as good.
They only sell them in packs of 50. So like if you ordered one pack, like you're gonna have plenty of tubes to play around with.
That sounds plenty, yeah.
Yeah, it's the one thing I'm like, I would kind of like 10.
Yeah, 50 seems like a lot.
Yeah, and they're kind of expensive, so it's like, well,
yeah, okay.
A bag of 50s, like, I can't remember how much it is, but they're not cheap.
It's like 200 odd pounds, I think. I don't know what that works out in dollars.
Yeah, that's probably like 250-ish. I don't know what the dollar is at right now.
Our exchange rate used to be good. Now it is awful.
I've just given up on looking at my bank account lately.
Yeah, well, I just bought a puppy, so I'm like, just don't look.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We're doing the same thing we did last time, which is totally fine. So we're gonna go on to water sources searches. And
okay, awesome.
Yeah. So similar here, the water sources was actually searches was almost more limited than the buried because it was almost exclusively about cadavers. Okay. So there are like huge sections of this chapter that are really gross and talking about like the stages of decomposition and like skin sloughing and bloating and stuff and like how that interacts. And it was just like, God, this isn't my life. Yeah, and just a lot of stuff that like what isn't as relevant for us. They did talk, like, I think it's interesting to think about, they talk a lot about how at different stages of decomposition, the body will be at different stages in the water table and also based on the water temperature, which I think was kind of then interesting to think about. So, yeah, so if you were doing like an invasive mussel that lives on the reef floor, versus like a crab that may be in tidal pools, so it's kind of a water search, but kind of not. Or like the whale feces, which floats but is pretty transient, temporary,
yep.
temporary.
Transient works.
Yeah, effervescent, ephemeral. There we go. Effervescent. I don't know what I'm talking about. And then they did have some really interesting stuff in here talking about so like this one showing where your odor may show up based on your current and your source. So it almost like there were parts of the water table information here, and I can hold this up a little longer. There were parts of this that reminded me a little bit of the learning earlier in the book about inversions and kind of seeing how like below an inversion the odor may be doing something, and then like at the inversion it may not come up, or it may, and then it may like do something paradoxical at or after the inversion, which I think kind of helped me think through it a little bit. It's not perfectly analogous, but you do have this like barrier involved.
Well, if the water's really cold, it would be analogous.
Yeah.
4-degree water.
And then let's see.
Well, we have some turtles that I was thinking about looking for, so that could be potentially relevant. Yeah, I think most people find the turtles when they're kind of like out, but
that's my understanding, or they're finding kind of like the burrows or the nesting areas.
Yeah,
but
in theory, and even
like the frog dog teams, it seems like they're mostly finding the frogs when they're up and out of the water.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, anything with live targets, especially something as agile as a frog, is tricky. Yeah, and then they had some other good kind of discussions on like, so here's one, this is lake, where the difference between if you've got wind but no current, so then you've got odor here and here, versus if you've got wind and current, then you can actually see how like, so this is the source and then this is the scent print. So you actually, by the time you had your boat like properly over the source, the dog wouldn't be an odor anymore.
Your dog's like, nope, it's not here.
Yeah, your dog's gonna say it's back here.
Yeah, interesting.
So just some really tricky and kind of interesting stuff. And then they talk a lot about like these different tactics for how to quarter into and figure out where your source is. So they were kind of like, as soon as you've found your source, or as soon as your dog is showing a change of behavior, you start like basically artificially quartering your way in until that dog stops showing its change of behavior, and then you know that like at least the scent print is in here.
Yeah, interesting.
Which just, God, it sounds like a lot of work. And also I'm super interested in like, and he doesn't talk about this at all, but training the dog for this and like teaching the dog how to show these changes of behavior just when odor is detected. and he uses the word alert a lot, and I'm not sure if the dog is actually performing like an alert the way that we talk about it, or if it's slightly different terminology. Like this one shows, it's another kind of quartering graphic of just a different method, and he's saying alert, alert, no alert, no alert, no alert. And I don't know.
Yeah, that kind of sounds like change of behavior, kind of like in order behavior.
Yeah, that's what I kind of read it as. But it's in like, yeah, it's really interesting to imagine like making sure you've got a dog with a clear enough, these really clear changes of behavior, and that you can read it. And you probably would want a dog who has these really, you'd almost want to be rewarding some amount of like an intense
sniffing
change of behavior. Yeah, or I'm almost thinking like it would almost be nice to have something like a spaniel where they're going to be like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, you know, and like show some sort of like pitter patter or something like, and that like kind of frantic in odor behavior, versus I'm just imagining like some of these dogs that are a little bit more stoic, like just it just seems hard, honestly.
Rachel, what do you work on?
Me, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Different things.
Cool.
So I started with red squirrel carcass, and also do some bat carcass, and we've just started training with an amphibian species, and also watervole poo. So.
Oh yay! I love the waterfall stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah. So I've got 3 dogs, 2 that are operational and 1 in training.
Neat.
I'm trying to just skim through this a little bit. Again, a huge portion of this chapter is just a lot of graphics showing like, if you
cool.
current at an angle or wind at an angle, and like if they're going the same direction versus opposite directions, and like what if they're perpendicular to each other. A lot of stuff where it's just like, gosh, I feel like I would need like, I need like a cheat sheet laminated and then just like in my boat if I were to be doing this.
I was just wondering, does anywhere in the chapters it talk about depth of water? Because one of my colleagues is actually working on a project where they're looking for crayfish, but they can go really deep, but where the dogs are probably going to be most used, I guess the dogs could be used where they're, because they can be a couple of meters down, but the human survey method finds them in kind of nothing more than half a meter, because that's what's safe to walk through and and look for them. And so kind of that's where the dogs are going to be starting, I think, to kind of compare how effective they are. But yeah, and I was just wondering if it mentioned anything about kind of the depth of water.
Not explicitly, but I think they're assuming, again, since it almost all comes from cadavers.
Yeah.
I've got to imagine the only time it's useful to throw a body in if you're putting a corpse in a body of water, it's got to be at least 3 meters deep. I feel like I would probably want it to be a lot deeper than that if I'm trying to hide it.
And it's probably all from like big lakes and stuff. Yeah.
Because it would be like small streams. Well, some of it would be bigger, but it could be like kind of small streams, and you know, we've talked a little bit about kind of which way would you work the dog up into the current, because if you've got lots of crayfish upstream, then would that just be really confusing, just like a wall of odor hitting the dog? Would you be better off working like with the current, so then the dog kind of comes across it and is on top of it?
Let me double check my notes.
This isn't my project, but it's just like we've been having lots of conversations about it. So
it does. Oh God, yeah, it's super interesting. Oh yeah, this was something I was thinking about a lot in this chapter, because a lot of his arrow directions, I was like, this actually isn't exactly how I would think I was doing it. And I think it's because, and we might have talked about this in our last call about this book, one of the differences in conservation generally, especially if you're dealing with, I'm assuming these crayfish are invasive.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that you're in a situation where you may find a lot of them. So you often do want to start, like if the wind is going that way, you want to start at the upwind side, so as soon as you start finding, you can then locate, versus I think a lot of times for cadavers, for missing people, you actually want to start at the downwind side, so that as soon as the dog catches odor, you can beeline up to that person and like decrease. I think they're much more worried about search time than we are, versus, especially with invasives, we're really focused on like the granularity.
Yeah.
It's like these graphics are, and I'm sorry, it's probably mirrored for you, are for rivers, and they're showing if the current is going this way, you're quartering this way.
Okay, yes, yeah.
So yeah, they're both showing you starting downstream and working upstream, but I wonder, this would be a really interesting, like I would love to get a cadaver dog person and then a conservation dog person who's done river stuff together to talk about it, because my instinct is that it's just because in a cadaver thing, you're just looking for the one body. As soon as your dog has odor, you want to be like going for it.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think about if there's any like rare stuff that lives in a river that I can't think of any examples that I've seen, but you've seen so many more examples, Kayla. Maybe you can. But like, would you, if you had just like a threatened species and you're expecting, I don't know, you still might expect to find like there might be like a small population in that river, so you still might expect multiple targets. But I was just wondering, like, would your strategy be different if it was something
if it was
rare?
It might be. Yeah. I'm trying to think.
I don't know, a threatened mussel, but then there would still be a bunch of them. So
yeah, you would think they'd probably still be together.
Yeah, exactly. So
I mean, in some ways it seems easier to start. I'm kind of imagining the Clark Fork River in Missoula, and I've talked to someone about there's a Superfund site on it, and they kind of want to look at turtle nesting in that area. And I'm kind of imagining the easiest way to do the search would still be to start upriver, and then you could almost drift downriver with the dog, rather than like having to quarter up. And if you could kind of drift downstream, shuttle back up, drift downstream in the middle of the channel, shuttle back up. Like, I don't know. I've never done river work, and I don't know. When I was at WD4C, I don't think, like, we didn't have any river projects there either. I know they've done some in the past, but I don't remember ever talking about search strategy there. I mean, it's often also just like what's convenient and possible.
Yeah.
That old chestnut.
I mean, at least with rivers, it's kind of like, I mean, your main options are upstream or downstream. So like, you're not generally gonna
I was like, what about my turtle swamp?
Yeah, and then
it's like a big floodplain. Like, technically it is a river, but the turtles live in the floodplain.
Well, and I wonder about, God, like sloughs where the water changes direction throughout the course of the day, like. And they don't cover the ocean really at all in this book. Like, it doesn't talk about tides. It doesn't talk about, like, that difference between like a lake that's maybe 100 meters deep versus an ocean that could be like kilometers deep.
Interesting. It'd be cool to get like do a little panel chat on this for your thing, Kayla.
Yeah, and I don't know if y'all saw, I don't know who in here is at the highest level.
Oh, we've lost Kayla.
Yeah, I was going to say, is she frozen for everyone? Is it me?
No, I think she's frozen for everyone. I can hear her. Okay. Tell me more about your doggos while we wait for her to come back, Rachel.
I have 2 crazy spaniels that do exactly what Kayla was describing.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. And then a Mali as well. So.
Oh, that's a neat combo.
Yeah, it is like it is nice because they have very different search styles and are good for different kind of projects. So it is nice to have those options.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I just got I don't know why I got a puppy instead of a grown-up dog, but anyway, mainly because my other dog doesn't really like other dogs, and so I'm like, maybe I can just like slowly teach them to love each other instead of having like grown-up dogs. I'm like, I can start with a puppy that doesn't have any issues, and hopefully it will go okay. But mostly what I am right now is sleep deprived. But
how old is your puppy?
He's 12 weeks old.
Oh goodness, puppy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've just been like manically socializing him, but but not too much. But make sure I tick all the things off.
Yeah.
Like
what kind of puppy did you get?
So he's a working line field lab retriever.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good choice for what you want, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because it's like more of a sort of generalist breed. He's big enough that he'll be big enough that he can cover lots of ground. If he needs to. Still super sniffy. Yeah. I don't know.
Oh, we've got
Let's
Kayla
hope.
back. Yeah.
Yay! Back. Sorry. It's funny, I paid for a hotel so that I would have better internet, and it's still, what are you gonna do? If y'all still have the energy, we can do a little bit of going through trails and trailing before I know I'm gonna need a potty break before the next call.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So trails and trailing then, and did I interrupt? I know it sounded like we were talking a little bit about new puppy breed.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about dogs while you were gone.
What? Honestly, I want these Patreon calls to be as much of a chat space as anything else. I love it when we don't get through the book because we're just talking shop. It's nice.
Yay.
Okay, so kind of similarly again in the trails and trailing, a lot of it is about people. So the first couple pages are a lot about potential bellows action from pant legs, releasing odor and odor wake and stuff that is just super not relevant to us.
Except for contamination.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking about when I looked at the pictures.
Yeah, God, yeah. I do always find the tracking info really interesting as far as and the same thing came up when I was reading Scent and the Scenting Dog, and how just little we know about what part the dog is searching for.
Yeah.
And all this talk of skin flakes and is it crushed vegetation and what components are most helpful to the dog is just super fascinating. The other, I think my favorite graphic and the part of this chapter I spent the most time on, because it's also not that long of a chapter, it's maybe 10 pages, is this graphic, which shows different ways that if you've got an L turn in your track, depending on where your odor or where your wind is in relation to your track, what
happened.
Yeah, what the dog's path is. So for example, here, this top one, the wind is going this way.
Mm-hmm.
So the dog is likely to overshoot up here and then come down. And the dog, as they're tracking, is actually kind of to the side of the trail again, instead of being in the center.
Yeah, interesting. Right, because it's so they're off the trail.
Yeah,
downwind, upwind. Downwind and upwind really confuse me. I have to draw them. Because I'm well, the scent is upwind and the dog is downwind, because they're both simultaneously. I just end up confused. One day I'll remember it.
It's funny because I can get upstream and downstream right, which are the same thing. I I don't know why upwind and downwind confuse me.
Great. Like, I like how you think. I'm going to use that to remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the dog is downwind of the scent. Yeah.
In this one. And the other dog is much more kind of actually along that track. Kind of depends. But I mean, both of these two, the wind is going the same as the track. One is going with the track and one is going against. And I don't know, I would be really curious to ask someone who does a lot of tracking what this gap can look like. Like, is that going to be a couple meters, or is that potentially like a dozen meters to where if that person dropped a shoe, you would not see it necessarily? Because if it's
right, like you could be 10 meters away and it's in the shrubbery and
because if you're only like a meter off of the track, you've got a decent chance of like, I'm just thinking like the only human search I've ever participated in was for a woman who'd been missing for 3 or 4 years. And, you know, so we were looking for personal belongings and bones and those sorts of things. And obviously you wouldn't be using a tracking dog in that situation. But one of the things I kept thinking about as I was doing it is just like, God, I could be 3 feet away from her wallet, and if she's got, or you know, like if this is what her car keys look like,
how do you find
if I'm not stepping directly over them, I'm not going to see them. You know, so anyway, I would be curious to ask someone who does tracking like what this spacing may look like. I'm sure it depends. But yeah, that was probably my favorite graphic of this chapter. Trying to see what else was in here. And then a lot of the second half of the chapter, like the last 4 or 5 pages, because again, this chapter is probably only 10 pages long, had some really fascinating case reports of particularly missing kids and the dog's track.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and the two that I found just absolutely mind-blowing was both of these are documented cases of dogs having tracked someone who was in a vehicle, which I always thought was bullshit.
No, apparently this is like a real thing. Like like the bloodhound people, like they put the dog in the car and just drive to the next bend and like take their dog out. And I was talking to some people that basically did tracking with their bloodhounds, and they basically would be like, okay, let's get in, we'll drive to the next corner. And it was like, I don't even know, like the skin comes out the window. They're kind of it's kind of like matching to sample as well, because they give them the article and then they get the vehicle I don't know, it's something amazing.
Like what it says is skin flakes and VOCs are exhausted from car vents, so that trailing should still be possible. The follow examples, which are only a few among many, show that car trails are in fact possible. The question is not whether dogs can do them, but under what condition can car trails be done. PhD students, please, someone do an analysis. I mean, again, this is like, it's not super relevant to conservation, but it's just like super duper interesting. And both of the cases that they show here, again, they've got little maps. They don't have too many turns. But this one apparently was over the course of 14 miles in Colorado. And I guess it doesn't say, but it says that this trail was exceptional because of its age, length, extensive hard surfaces, and vehicle and personnel distractions. The next day, the team picked up where the searchers picked up where the dog team left off, and discovered the dog's body, or the person's body, in the canyon where the dog had kind of like shown their last big change of behavior. And later the dog led investigators from Deer Creek Canyon back to the apartments where the murderer lived. Like, what? Anyway, this chapter was just really cool. But I
think it could be really helpful for conservation if you've got species that, like, anything that has a nest that you don't know where it is, basically, or a denning site, that you don't know where it is. I feel like that could be quite helpful, like especially if you wanted to do like tagging or something like that.
I could see it being useful as well to do like like almost tracking from a known scat back to a den, or tracking from a camera or something. Here, bud. What's wrong?
Yay! Get in. Yay! Hi, Niffler.
Say hi.
Oh, hi.
He kind of like intermittently just looks like he's got stuff stuck in his ear, but as far as I can tell, he's never actually got anything in there or an ear infection. Just gets ghosts.
Ear ghosts.
Ear ghosts. The ghost of my ears. Well, cool.
Yeah.
Jess, did you have anything you wanted to throw into this? You've been quiet, and that's allowed if you don't want to talk to us.
No, I'm just multitasking, so you don't need to see me sorting through things while I listen. So, you know, what I would say about this book, I think that it could have been a lot more readable if he had used more examples.
The examples really made the book for me.
Because some of the stuff, like in the earlier chapters with like the wind blowing this way and the thing, he had like little pictures, but I know you were complaining a little bit about the cadaver stuff, but I wanted more cadaver examples, not because I'm particularly interested in cadavers, but just because everybody knows the size of a human body. We know that it sort of oozes and gives off things. And so he could have, at different points in the book, been like, if there was a body here, and you had the sun rising and the cold air and the ground, like it would have made it a lot more easy to stick in the head. Like what, instead if he had these little drawings about the, you know, the sort of, he had like a little like puddle of some like whatever, you know, unknown source, right? And then you know, would have like the layers. So I thought that it would have been a lot more readable if he had sort of carried an example. It doesn't have to be, it could have been like a pile of mushrooms. Like I don't care what it was, but just sort of drag it through the book so that we could see the different conditions. So that's my feedback.
Also, my other like maybe critique, and not that I don't mind that he used cadavers, like he's a SAR guy. I think it was mostly just like a note of, you know, knowing how large those odor sources may be, that it may or may not be the same for us. But I would love to have some like a graphic design student go through the book and like remake some of the graphics just to be prettier, because I feel like he could have like sold these graphics.
Yeah.
I mean, that like most of them were functional, but
yeah, I think what he did, you know, do, and it came up a lot, and I think it's an important takeaway, is that, you know, what it seems that what works best for teams is to work in the same environment and know your environment. So if you are hunting for like some weird fungus or something like that, you test it out yourself and you try an early morning search, you try like an after rain search, and you try these things, and you will get your own data. Because even the stuff that he says, it's like, but that can be affected by falling barometric pressure or something, you know, and it's like, well, you know, it's just some of the stuff is too complex, and he says it, he's honest about it. Some of the stuff is too complex for him to sort of make you a rule that you can go search under those conditions. So his main point is like, search the same areas. Even with the water thing, he was saying like having the same boat handler can help a team. Just the same person, you know, that you're connecting with as you do your searches can help a team's success, because that person, you know, can watch the dog and guide the boat and sort of gets to know how the team works. So I think that's important.
No, I agree. And I think it's like both one of the advantages and disadvantage of the conservation dog world, that like if I were a police dog handler, it would be pretty easy to be like, okay, my jurisdiction is Missoula County, so I will get to know Missoula County, and you're like pretty, and you know that you're pretty much only ever going to go out in Missoula County. You may occasionally get out to like a neighboring county or something, but And then as a conservation dog handler, like one of the upsides we have is we know when we're going to go out. We often go out repeatedly to the same place over and over. But we also may be in these situations where we have like a pilot program or, you know, a field season. Like I can't test in Nebraska. Like I couldn't be like reading this book and be like, oh, good idea. I'm going to go like set off a smoke bomb at like these various times in the day on this wind farm in Nebraska, because I only have site access when I have site access.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, it was like Kenya would be an even better example where I was like, okay, I'm getting on the ground and now I have to like figure out Kenyan air movement in 6 weeks. And then I leave and I may or may not ever come back.
Yeah. I think I mean, hopefully there'll be stuff published on it, but the very long time spent in Afghanistan should hopefully produce or be producing some data on searching in arid conditions and things like that, because it's an environment that we don't have typically here. But that would also be something like if you can make it in a way that is easy and non-aversive for you to do, just to write down, you know, I don't know, have some sort of app that records the wind pressure or the barometric pressure, the wind direction, the temperature, and then how many finds you have that day. And it's like it doesn't need to be a big sort of thing, but like a pattern may emerge that you get. But you have to make it in a way that like if it feels like you need to like log something like after you get home and you're like, so it just is like, you know, 3 lines with just you pick a few metrics and you record them, and I bet you would get some data about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It might not be dramatic, like 0 one day and 20 the next, but it may be that you're finding in the teens on one day and you're finding in the single digits, you know, the day after it rains or something like that.
I don't know that you could necessarily do that because you can't, unless you're going to search like the same site multiple times. You have to test that experimentally, because like, how would you know that it's not just like a very batty site because the bat goes through this particular part of the wind farm?
Yeah. Well, so what I was thinking, one of the things on the wind farm that generally we do is each turbine gets searched every week. So we would have some amount of data, but what we ran into is it seemed like the weather conditions actually more accurately predicted the bat movement than the odor movement. So we would get much higher bat fatalities the day after a storm, or maybe 2 days after a storm. I can't quite remember. And it was because basically there would be like an insect boom and then a bat boom, and then they would all get killed. And it wasn't because the scenting conditions were ideal.
Yeah.
But we did do, I mean, and this is the sort of data that because we're subcontractors, we don't have access to. Like they do search for efficiency trials and carcass persistence trials where they put out known bats without telling the teams. And then they're looking at what percentage of these we find. And you could cross-reference the weather and our GPS data with that to see, like they would, like our West would be able to calculate that on like a really cool massive scale, because they're running all of these wind farm projects all across the country. But I don't know if they have the interest in running those projects, and they're very, very proprietary about a lot of their data. So I don't know if they ever would. Like each wind farm is very protective of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's still, even if it does have something to do with bat movement, you would still get data that way. And you still may find a signal even among that with certain types of conditions, right? So you still might be able to get a signal. So, I mean, I think it's you know, hopefully they'll consider releasing some data, but.
Yeah, it's definitely the sort of thing that we. At what distance did you notice your dog's change of behavior, and what was the weather that day? And did your dog find everything easily based on, you know, or did you have to modify your search strategy a little bit to make sure your dog got the find? Like,
yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll cut it off here so can all take our potty breaks before the next call, but I'll see you all in 10 minutes.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yay, thanks, Kayla.
Bye-bye.